Good afternoon and welcome to our How to Establish a Cyber Security Readiness Program webinar. We are excited to share with you our strategy and insights as cybersecurity threats continue to evolve and change. But before we get into the content, I'd like to make sure that you know that if you have any questions at the end, we'd be happy to answer them. Or if you have any feedback, please let us know so that we can continue to improve the content that we provide. If you stay through to the end, you'll be eligible for a special promotion provided by Etactics. If you have to leave, don't worry, because we are recording this webinar and we'll send everyone who signed up a link to the video. And without further ado, here are our special guests for today's webinar. With over 15 years of operations and leadership experience, Josh Holden is a senior account executive at ABA Insurance Services, providing risk management and coverage analysis services to independent insurance agents across Michigan, Ohio, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, and New York. He has participated in numerous expert panel discussions centered on data breach risk management and associated cyber insurance trends. Josh earned his BS from the U.S. Military Academy at West Point and his MBA from the Ohio State University. Mark Madar has over 26 years of experience guiding companies in compliance policies and standards implementation, conducting IS risk assessment and audits, as well as performing due diligence and business process reengineering. He has worked with financial services, healthcare, government, technology, professional services, manufacturing, and legal organizations. He is a recurring speaker on data privacy, cybersecurity risk management, and business continuity planning topics. Mark has served on various advisory committees and executive forums, and has been featured in publications such as CSO and CFO. I'm going to hand it over to Mark.
Terrific. Good afternoon, everyone. So as Matt had described, the purpose and the reason why I would hope everyone's on this call here today is to try to get your arms around cybersecurity. It's a topic that is front and center with most nations nowadays, and there's a lot to it here. There's a technical aspect to it that people are just trying to figure out, what do I need to do to secure my environment? There's a regulatory aspect to it that people are trying to understand, what do I have to do, and does this apply to me? And more simply, it's just best practices. In order to secure our environment here, what are the things that we need to be thinking about? So today's conversation is really focused around keeping this in layman terms for you. What are the things that you need to know? What do you need to understand and be considering within your environment? My group spends a lot of time with organizations, from financial services organizations to healthcare to operations, and it's the same. Either you have to do this based under some type of regulation, your clients are asking you to do something, or just simply from a best practice standpoint, you don't want to be on the front paper of being some type of cyber attack and having to try to deal with it and the impacts from a reputational standpoint and just keeping your operations up and running. So we're going to look at these various topics here today. I want to start off with a few minutes to talk about just the landscape itself when we talk about, okay? A few weeks before James Comey became the former FBI director, he was talking about it from the standpoint, presenting that cyber risk and cyber threat is growing too fast. It's too big for any one group to handle. So collectively, every organization needs to be informed on this. They need to do their part, and more importantly, there needs to be information sharing from organization to organization within your different industries. Okay? So what are we talking about when we talk about all these different risks? And what does the future hold? What are the industry experts saying that are the greatest risks that we have to deal with? From left to right here, the expanding perimeter. What do I mean by that? It means that more and more organizations continue to push more up to the cloud here. So before we were talking about boundaries, everything was within your physical location, control it. Now you're pushing more out to the cloud. Okay, so there's now more risk. There's more opportunities for threats in these situations here. There's a perspective out there that, well, by just putting it out in the cloud, I'm safer, or I should be. Okay, Third parties. More and more people are utilizing third parties to conduct work. And the third component here is from a mobile standpoint here. But people are taking work home here. That means that no matter how secure you've made your network environment and your firm computers, your organization, you've got people using personal devices at home, smartphones, personal laptops. So all these are areas of new risk here of having to manage. Emerging technology. We're talking about from the standpoint of every day we look in the news, there's some new technology that's out there, whether it's some type of new feature on cars to get your emails, storing information, to the latest and greatest internet technology that has some level of data on it. So those are things we have to worry about. Organizations are keeping more data now. There's a statistic to say that by 2020, just in the next 3 years, there's going to be 50 times more the amount of confidential data that people are storing today, just today, 50 times more. Why are people keeping it? For marketing, sales purposes, to better understand and sell more to their clients. And finally, the modern software. Everyone wants to be the, first to the table here with their technology solution. And because of that rapid deployment here, things are getting missed here, or security is being overlooked here, or the testing that needs to be done. So all of this that you're seeing here, devices, more data, more technology, all creates more risk here. And for that standpoint, these are things we need to be considering here moving forward. Okay. So not only do we have that, but we also have the simple fact here is that the attackers are out there and the cyber threats are becoming more sophisticated here. It's not the old days of the movies like War Game, where everyone just got into one password and they're into some major network here with access to all the data. Today it's more of a puzzle, and there's various pieces and parts here that are being fished here to take that information to collect the kind of bigger picture of what people are looking for here. Okay, so when you look at on this next screen here, all the different types of attacks are out there. Okay, they're becoming harder to detect. To the extent here where you've probably seen this or heard about this, of emails going internally within your own network here to members that it looks like it's coming from the president of your organization giving certain instructions. Okay, fake websites here, apps that you click on. It looks like you're clicking on something from ABC News and it's not. Okay, so for all these reasons and all these phishing exercises and ransomware that's out there, and they're harder to detect here. And I always tell people it's not a matter about if it's going to happen, because it will happen. Okay, it's a matter of how do you do what you need to do your part to protect your environment, and that's what we're going to talk about now. Okay, what's the impact of your environment? All these things, not only loss of information, and that information may not be personal information, identifiable information like people's names, social security numbers, things like that. You may not even handle that. It may be simply just company private information that you have. Okay, so this all applies to you as well too. It can create a business disruption. If it does get out, there's reputational risk, financial loss, your clients leaving you, and possibly regulatory risks and fines if you're not doing the things you need to be doing here. Okay? So when we talk about all this, it's real, it's out there, and you need to be doing things. So depending on where you're at in your maturity level, and we're going to talk about those different things you need to be doing, you need to get started on this. And if you feel that you have started taking steps towards having a cybersecurity program within your organization, you need to constantly, it's not a one-time initiative. You need to be taking the time to assess it, make sure it stays current, and most importantly, that people are following policies and procedures here. Okay? So as you see on this chart here, it's everyone's responsibility. I've seen too many times that people hear the term cybersecurity and they throw it over the fence to IT. This is an IT problem to solve. It's not. Certainly there's a technical aspect to it, but there are elements of this that the leadership needs to understand in every operational area of the organization. Okay? There's no such thing as partial compliance here. Either you're doing it or you're not. And we spend a lot of time as we assess our clients and help them through this process here to make sure that you're fully doing the things that you need to be doing based off of these standards. Okay? Finally here, from a cybersecurity program standpoint, it has to be managed, monitored. There is no silver bullet out there. There's no one technology to answer all of the things that you need to be doing. Okay? It's a combination of things. Okay? So, how do you get started? Or again, maybe you feel that you have some level of cybersecurity components in here. The things that you need to be thinking about, it starts off with an assessment. What do we have at risk here within your organization? That's the first fundamental questions to ask here internally. Okay. Our clients all the time go through that process to figure out what's at risk here. What type of business do you have? What type of privacy data do you have? Where is it going? Where is it stored? Working through those types of questions. Okay. And then based on the standards that are out there that we're going to look at here over the next couple slides, how are you doing up against those? What do you need to be doing? Okay. And making sure that we help our clients make sure that those standards are in place here, whether that's policies, technology solutions, a combination of all the above. So when we talk about a cybersecurity program, every regulation, whether you fall underneath HIPAA, whether you're under the financial services arms and you fall underneath the banking or credit union or asset management firms, whatever it may be, or simply just under state requirements to protect privacy data, you need some type of framework. Most of these organizations have built their framework off of what we refer to as the NIST standard. Simply put, this is a set of requirements that your leading experts had got together to say, if we created a solid information security program, what does that look like? And on the left-hand side here, you will see that it needs to be able to identify where your risk is. You have to be able to protect it. You have to be able to monitor it. And if something does happen after the fact, you have to be able to effectively respond to it and recover from it. So those are the basics, elements here of the framework that we base off and everyone on the call should be looking at within your organization. Now we're going to break these down into more meaningful cases here of what you need to be looking at. So on this next slide here, you're going to see that there are various categories. So when we talk about standards, whether it's under regulatory standards or it's best practices, these are the 7, what I'll call main buckets that you need to be thinking about within your organization. The first one being governance and risk assessment. We'll talk through each of these: network security, access rights and controls, ensuring that you're doing having certain elements in place here to protect your data, third parties you work with who handle your data, that they've got appropriate safeguards, to continuity plans and responding to cybersecurity attacks, to foundational training here for your employee base. So each of these elements that we're going to touch on here need to be addressed. So when we go into an organization and spend some time looking at what they have and helping them through this process, the first major component here is from a governance risk assessment standpoint. As I had mentioned earlier, you need to first and foremost understand what your risk is within your organization and be able to document that and identify, okay, we have these threats and these risks. What controls do we have in place to deal with these? And document that. Okay, it's important, the documentation piece of this here, because each year you need to be pulling this out, looking at this to say what's changed in our environment. Do we have new processes, new systems, new services we offer? Okay, so that's a key component that the regulatory bodies want to see, is that you document it, you identify it, and you review it on a routine basis. Okay? Based on what those threats are, you have to build policies and procedures. Everything from password protection to safeguarding your computers to how you're going to review and audit. So there's various components that make up your policies and procedures. And finally, you have to have oversight of this. And the oversight is from a hierarchy standpoint, from top down. The most highest leadership of your organization needs to understand what threats you have and understand what your overall program looks like. But you also need to have somebody who's managing this, somebody who's making sure that your policies and procedures are being adhered to. Okay? So that's the first step in the process. The next one is from a network security standpoint. You need to be monitoring your environment here. Even if this is sitting at if you outsource your IT services to somebody, you need to ensure that the environment that you're operating in, your network environment, and where your systems reside, have the appropriate controls, that there are firewalls, that there are appropriate network security in place here, that there's monitoring of it, that there's logging of activity so you can track it if something does happen, that you're applying all the appropriate patches from antivirus to operational system patching, that all these elements are being done to safeguard your environment. In particular, I want to point out the vulnerability scans and pen testing. We do a lot within the financial services, and the regulators really push on these two, and this is a good practice for any type of organization. You need to understand by running and working with your IT provider or an outside provider. We do this a lot for our clients, that we'll do a pen testing to ensure that from an overall standpoint that you don't have any gaps or opportunities for risk of somebody being able to expose those risks and get into your network. Okay. The next category is from a data loss prevention standpoint. First and foremost, I see a lot of organizations who aren't doing this. You have a lot of systems within your organization, most likely running your business. You've got users set up on your network, on various applications. Do you ever look at those users and run user lists to see who has what rights and responsibilities within the systems, to verify that there was not some type of attack and some type of guest ID set up? So it's important for you to validate who has access to what. And that may be down even to the folder level. You may have certain folders that not everyone in your organization should have access to. So there needs to be a process of reviewing that to make sure that you have that locked down appropriately. Password controls, are you changing your passwords? Do you have strong credentials? More lately, there is less focus on the password itself. There's more focus now on multi-factor authentication. And for those who aren't familiar what that is if you're accessing certain systems, you may have seen this like with your credit card information or your bank systems, that you give in a code that's sent to, let's say, your phone that you have to enter in. It's an additional layer of security to validate that you are who you are before accessing it. Okay, and those types of things are what's being pushed out here to organizations of all sizes here. From a data loss prevention, what are other things you should be doing? And these are things that we help look at here with our client base. Do you have encryption? There is an expectation now that you are encrypting any device that is storing sensitive data. So if you have laptops, those need to be encrypted here. Backup tapes. Even the devices that you've got mobile solutions in place, that if you're allowing your employees to use personal devices, that those are being safeguarded and have the same type of security that you would have in your office. Okay. Other things. Do you have a full list? Do you know where your data is located? Any privacy data? Types of lists are going to be helpful for you at the time of an incident, and just making sure you've got appropriate controls in place. How long are you cleaning data? We see often with our organizations that most organizations are not purging data. It's just sitting out there year after year, and you're creating a risk for yourself. So going through the process to purge that information on some scheduled basis here and look at it and get rid of that risk is beneficial. Okay. Transmitting. Most people know nowadays that if you have privacy data, it should not just be sent over open email over the internet. It needs to be secured. Either you're using an encryption tool set, email, or it's some type of share filing that's encrypted, but that's a very fundamental element that needs to be there. Besides the physical security of access into offices, locking up network closet rooms, server rooms, making sure that people are following a clean desk policy, all of those things fall under physical security, things you need to be doing. And one that a lot of people just don't do, and it may be based on size of your organization, is your clients and sharing the privacy information. How are you validating the person on the other end of the phone requesting it? Do you have procedures in place? So those are all things that fall underneath data loss prevention. Okay. The last few categories here are around what happens if something does happen. What if there is a breach? Or put aside even from a cyber security standpoint that you have some significant crisis that happened. Your building's in a pile of ashes. You have to be able to respond and recover to these situations, whether it's an attack, your business had an issue here, you can't operate and access your data. You need to have plans in place on it. So we help our clients all the time put together recovery strategies and plans to deal with this, even from a network standpoint or cyber attack, of how do we manage the incident. There may have been a breach, so how do we handle these breach notification procedures? And these are things that you're going to hear Josh talk about. One of these categories you see here on the screen called cyber insurance here. If something does happen, there's a lot of support around that, and he'll be touching on that. Okay? And your plans are only as good as you go through exercises and review them. So we'll do a lot of times with our clients of going through some different tabletop scenarios, making sure, okay, everyone, if we did have a cyber incident, how are we recovering from it? Let's walk through some different situations. Our building's in a pile of ashes. How are we going to continue our business? So those are all elements that fall underneath when we talk about from a cybersecurity standpoint. The last two categories are vendor risk management and training. As I mentioned early on, organizations continue to push more and more out to third-party providers here, either from a cloud system standpoint or just a third party who's handling your business data and your client's data. There are now rules that, apart from regulation, that you are expected to ensure that you're verifying that they have adequate controls in place. You cannot turn your head and assume that they're safeguarding your data. If you're using them as a service provider, there are steps for you to validate that they have appropriate controls. Okay, and there are, you know, we're not talking a full-scale audit that you have to go on site here and lift up the hood, but there are questionnaires and there's supporting information that you need to collect from them to validate that they have those appropriate controls in place. Okay. Finally, from a training and a white, some of the stats are that when you look at the breaches, in just this past year, there was 420 billion data records that were reported stolen, and that's only the ones that were actually reported. 420 billion data records. 43% of these data breaches were caused by poor internal security practices. So you're talking almost half of the situations were just simple things that through employee training and education would have addressed. So from that standpoint, this is a critical element and a requirement with most of these regulations that you're providing some type of annual training and ongoing awareness. Okay, so when we're going in to talk to a client here and they're asking, what is this assessment? We'll typically start off looking at the policies and procedures that you have in place. Whether it's it may be partially there, we'll look at documentation. we're typically interviewing key groups within the organization, IT, some of the senior management, to understand where risk is at, both from a technology and from an operational standpoint. And then we'll usually go through those categories and create a roadmap here for the firm. And this is something that everyone needs to be thinking about of, okay, for each of these categories that Mark just talked about, how are we addressing each one of these? Because these are the baseline set of things that everyone should be doing. Anything that I just talked about is not over the top. These are things that are fundamental things that, regardless of what type of organization you are, you should be doing. Okay. The last two items here before I hand this over to Josh that I want to explain here are some lessons learned. So I've been doing this for 26 years. My organization that I lead, we do this all the time. What are some of the themes that we see out there? Okay. And typically there is involvement. Senior leadership has usually their thumb on this to understand generally that we need to be doing these things, and they usually will certainly provide the support for it. Okay, that's typically what we see. For the most part, people are doing some type of antivirus, patch management. Encryption's still a little bit up in the air. We're seeing encryption for like email, data transmission. Most of the cases, people are encrypting their company computers. Where we see it, the risk is of personal devices, making sure that those are encrypted. Passwords are in place here. Validation of people when they're calling in, those types of things are in place here. Physical security is in place. There's usually some level of testing of backups and recovery of systems. And usually there's some type of basic awareness and education that's being done for the employees. So those are the things that we see that most organizations are doing. This last slide here are areas that I think a lot of organizations are struggling with. Okay, that somebody's created a policy, a set of policies, but they're not actionable or not reviewing them. They're sitting on a shelf somewhere collecting dust. Okay, and that's where the policies in some cases need to be written so that the employees understand it, and you're putting actionable steps. ITCs. Okay, I talked about the scans. Those are critical. Vulnerability scans are things that your IT group should be doing on a routine basis, at a minimum at least quarterly. We recommend monthly. At least on an annual basis, you should have an outside party do a pen testing. When we do these for our organizations, the pen test, we always say you need to rotate it. You don't have the same person doing these tests here, so you can get a different perspective from different providers. You need to review your users. You need to know where your data is at. You need to make sure those smartphones and things that you use, bring your own personal devices in, connecting to email and sensitive data, that those things are being protected here. And as I had talked about just here in the last few slides here, vendor risk assessments and having actionable plans and testing them need to occur. Okay, so those are elements that I would stress here to really focus in on. I'm going to hand this over here to Josh, and we'll wrap this up here at the end.
Thanks, Mark. Yeah, that was a great overview of sort of the risk management piece of this whole cybersecurity discussion. And the insurance part is something that a lot of people sort of say, well, I've done all these risk management best practices. I've done all the things that I can do. Why do I need a cyber insurance policy? And if I do have a cyber insurance policy, which I would highly recommend everybody do have, what should it look like? Okay, so for this slide, it's really asking the question, what's my exposure? Do I accept credit cards? Do I bank online? Am I using social media on a daily basis? Am I storing sensitive customer or employee data? Do I use the internet? If you do any one of those things, and if you're a business owner or work for a company that transacts in any sort of way, you're doing all of these things. So the exposure is there for things to happen that could negatively impact your organization. And an interesting statistic here, half of all cyber insurance claims involved fund transfer fraud or ransomware attacks in 2016. Now, obviously these other types of incidents are happening, but just interesting to note that most, roughly half of them come from those two types of attacks. And the way I would describe cyber insurance would be like, auto insurance. You could be the best driver in the history of driving. You wear your seatbelt all the time. You follow all the traffic laws on the road. You are an excellent driver. And then you have somebody T-bone your car at an intersection. You did everything in your power, under your control, to make sure that you're preventing an accident from happening, and it still happens. Well, I would equate that to why you have a cyber insurance policy. All these things that Mark talked about are critical, are essential to making sure the organization is as protected as it can be, but you still have a chance, and a good chance at that, of something going awry. Okay, so a lot of people that I talk to, particularly business owners, really are kind of confused as to how a cyber insurance policy works. And really the easiest way to explain it is, a good cyber insurance policy, and this, by the way, is something to ask your insurance broker if you do have a policy, if it's structured in this manner. But they have a first-party loss component and a third-party liability component. So when you're talking first-party loss, you're talking the evaluation of the data breach piece right here. So if you have a breach or a suspected data breach, forensic investigation and legal review to ensure not only that the breach is remediated from a legal perspective, but also all the data that was potentially or compromised is restored to where it was before. So it's really responding to the actual attack itself. Now the third-party piece, the third-party liability piece is, what could happen as a result of a breach. So you're talking business interruption costs. You're talking about notifying customers of possible a breach of their credit and identity that they came in with. You're talking about public relations and crisis management. You don't really open the newspaper anymore every single day without seeing a cybersecurity incident at a huge company. Now, mind you, a lot of people say, well, I'm not Target, I'm not Sony, I'm not HBO. They're not gonna go after me. They're gonna go after those big ones. And I would tell you that those organizations that I just mentioned have teams and teams and teams of risk managers and people who are dedicated to the cybersecurity readiness of those organizations. And most of the smaller businesses that I'm sure a lot of people on this call are in or run don't have those controls in place. So, at the end of the day, it's really low-hanging fruit for cyber criminals to go after those types of organizations. Okay, so let's just focus, and this is a very sort of high-level discussion about cyber insurance. I don't want to get too far in the weeds here, and nobody's going to become a cyber insurance expert after this webinar. But we just want to make you aware of those two types of attacks that have proliferated in 2016. So half of all attacks during that time. So fund transfer fraud and ransomware. Okay, so fund transfer fraud, what is it? It's the loss of money due to an unauthorized user instructing your bank to wire funds out of an account. And the way that this can happen is through what Mark had mentioned. Social engineering is one way, where there's an impersonation of a CEO or a CFO asking to transfer funds to certain accounts. And Mark actually had an interesting statistic the other day. He said that of 9 CEOs that were tested with this social engineering piece. So they went out and they said, okay, we're going to just send this email and just see how many of these high-level company officers respond and actually carry out the request. 8 of 9 of those people actually did it. So that's a pretty alarming statistic there, that these hackers have gotten so sophisticated and so nuanced in how to do this that people really don't even know the difference. And I'll tell you that I bank with USAA, and I got an email from them instructing me to change my password and to disclose my bank account number. The only way that I knew that it was a fake email is that it went into my junk folder. Now, if that had gone into my regular inbox, I might have been in trouble. Okay, claims example. Malware download onto Jim's desktop where he clicked a link in an email. And I'm sure that this has happened to everybody at least once ever since we've had computers. And like I said, these cyber criminals are getting more and more nuanced. They are 2 and 3 steps ahead of what we know the exposure to be. And it's almost like I would equate to steroid testing back in the 90s when Barry Bonds and Mark all those home runs. Well, Major League Baseball was testing them for these steroids that were 2 and 3 generations old, and they had new drugs that they could use that nobody had any effective testing to detect. So that's kind of how you would compare that. Now, why would we insure this? And something to remember too is that not every cyber insurance policy will cover fund transfers fraud. So that's something to ask your insurance broker. That is actually the case. The insurance will actually indemnify you for those funds that were lost, directing those wire funds out of the account. So really important that those insurance will actually give you the money back that you lost. Okay, ransomware. So this is a type of malicious software designed to block access to a computer or a system of computer files until a sum of money is paid. And obviously this can be catastrophic for any organization that deals with customer data, data that has to deal with distribution. So Mark and I actually had a meeting with a distribution company yesterday. They have operations in China, India, the United States, and if any of those distribution centers, if their data is locked, they have no way of knowing what orders are coming in, what orders are going out. They're essentially brought to a screeching halt. So pretty scary stuff. Okay, claims example of ransomware, and this is obviously a little bit of a smaller scale, but still, as catastrophic to this center. A florist was hit with a ransomware virus which locked its server and then delivered an extortion demand for the equivalent of $1,000 in Bitcoin. And that's sort of been a trend among these kinds of attacks, that these cyber criminals will demand Bitcoin, oppose cash. And what that does is it makes those attackers more difficult to detect, as they make those transactions. So why do we insure? Obviously we need to get access to the data again. And most businesses would maybe be available for 2 or 3 days and able to function. But after a week, it's going to cost a significant amount of money and possibly shut that business down. Okay, looking at a good insurance policy, what you want to do is make sure that the loss control services are robust. And we'll just take an example here of the Great American Forum. They have a program called CyberScout, and within that, those loss control services, which are included in the cost of the policy, you get educational resources, which are great to supplement the programs that Mark would bring to the table. And even if you have some redundancy there, it's better to have a redundant process or educational resource than not have it at all. Incident response plan templates, notification laws and regulations, risk calculators that actually determine how much insurance is needed based on some proprietary information, and then just some general updates on news in the cybersecurity arena. Okay, so the other thing to look for in a good cyber insurance policy is the response plan. And what you want to ask your insurance broker is, how does the cyber insurance policy respond to an attack? And what you don't want to hear is, there's really no point of contact, that it's incumbent upon the insured to contact all these different organizations to respond to the first party loss and the third party liability pieces. That is not what you want to hear. What you want to hear is, there's one point person, a breach coach, who will coordinate all those services for you and make sure that everybody is doing what they're supposed to do. So you need a quarterback on that, from that carrier, from that whole service, to make sure that everybody's on the same page. Okay, so cyber insurance is simply put, it's one part of the risk management of cybersecurity equation, right? So you want to make sure that you're doing everything you can to prevent a cyber attack or breach. Unfortunately, these things happen more often than not, and they're just happening more and more. And it's really, Mark really said it well, that it's not really a question of if, it's a question of when at this point. So it's really being vigilant about these risk management practices, and it really starts at the leadership team. I mean, the C-suite really has to believe in protecting its organization and that this exposure is real. The other thing is to really dive in with your insurance broker. You need to understand what the exposure is, and I think we've covered that at a high level today. But you also have to know what policy, and does your insurance policy adequately cover those exposures that your organization has. And if your insurance broker can't explain it, or doesn't have the resources within their company to explain it to you, then it's probably time to think about going to somebody else that knows what they're doing. And then, lastly, it's making cybersecurity a priority. At the end of the day, it's something that, it's not going away. And quite frankly, Mark and I had this discussion yesterday. It's not something everybody wants to think about. It's not something everybody jumps up out of bed in the morning and says, hey, I want to do cybersecurity. Unfortunately, it's a fact of life, and it's the cost of doing business. And if you put your head in the sand and you don't take these things seriously and consider them to be a vital part of business operations, it's just a matter of time. So, it really starts with the leadership at the top of the organization, and just, continuing to make it a priority. That's all I got.
So this is Mark. One last point here before we wrap up, as far as next steps. I think for you as an organization, our recommendation is start off understanding what risk you have at your organization. I think that's the most fundamental thing that you can do, is have we considered all of these that we had walked through here, including cyber insurance, to understand what needs to be done here. The second part here is managing it. Okay, and one of the biggest concerns I hear from organizations are, Mark, we put in this great program, but now I have to manage it. Any suggestions, recommendations? That's why for a long time we've been working here with Etactics, is because they have a compliance solution that allows you to put all these requirements in one place and track them and assign them to people and make sure that you know what your due dates are. Whether you're having to do it yourself, or you've got different people in your organization who plays a role in making sure that you're in compliance, the things need to be managed here. So that's important to note here, that if there's any information in any one of our three areas, from either an assessment or helping build policies or build continuity plans for you, we're certainly interested in talking, certainly from an insurance standpoint, trying to understand this and recommendations of how to approach this, Josh guidance, and Matthew from the standpoint from Etactics here to understand how do I manage all this. I've got all this in place here. I've got my day job to do too. How do I get my arms around this to make sure I'm continuously doing these things? And that's a conversation, I think, with Matt. So with that said here, I'm going to hand this over here to Matt. We appreciate your time here today. I think there's maybe some questions here that we have, Matt.
Yeah, as long if you guys have any questions while we roll through a few that some of you actually questioned or emailed me before the webinar started, which is always something good to have. Go ahead and type them in the chat. But right now, Mark, I got a question for you. Say we're going to outsource our IT. Is cybersecurity something that will cover for us, or that they will cover for us?
Yeah, I think that's a great point to make here. We see a lot of organizations who are utilizing outside IT support. And the one thing that I think you really need to understand, and maybe as part of your due diligence of your IT provider here, is do they understand cybersecurity? Do they have other clients that they're servicing that are under some type of regulation? And making sure that they're working in partnership here with you and educating you on the things that you need to do from a technology standpoint. So I think a lot of times people throw it over the fence to say, well, they're managing all for us, they're handling this. And that's a false assumption here that we strongly recommend that you have these types of discussions here with them to make sure that the data centers that your servers are sitting in have the appropriate safeguards, and that the controls that they're providing to you are meeting your expectations here on these various categories we talked about.
Okay. And we have another question. This one's for Josh. What are the must-haves of a cybersecurity policy? What should I be looking for from a coverage perspective?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it would definitely require just a really thorough review of the options that you have. Think of it, again, I'll go back to an example. A good auto insurance policy will pay for a rental car while your car is in the shop. If you buy something that's a little bit less expensive and don't get that sort of coverage, that's sort of on you and just an extra expense. So, relating to that, first of all, you got to make sure that it's going to cover both first-party losses and third-party liability. There's some policies out there that will only cover the first-party loss piece. So you want to make sure that if you end up getting sued as a result of this incident, that the insurance company will pay for that. Other things to consider: does policy cover both electronic and non-electronic media? And that's talking about libel, defamation, and copyright infringements on somebody's website. So there's that. Does the policy cover fraudulent transfer? The exposure that we've gone today. There's some policies that won't cover or indemnify you for those funds that are lost. Does the policy provide for lost profit and extra expenses associated with adverse media coverage? So let's say this thing gets into the Cleveland Plain Dealer, into the local paper, and you don't have a PR firm or a crisis management plan in place to respond to it. And that is actually a very important thing to have in a cyber insurance policy, that you have that PR firm in place that knows what to do and how to frame the incident so that it doesn't careen out of control. And there's a ton of other questions to ask, but at the end of the day, it's being inquisitive with your insurance broker and just making sure that the policy is covering all the exposures that are there.
Thanks, Josh. I think that's all the questions we have for right now. But now, before we get into the promotion, which I know a lot of you are excited about, you can reach out to Mark. Here's his contact information. I'll let you guys, I'll pause it here for a little bit so that you can write it down if you need to. I'm also going to be providing this information for you when I follow up with everyone. So there's Mark's contact information, and then Josh, if you'd like to reach out to Josh, here's his contact information. Like I said, I'll be providing it for everyone once I follow up with all the attendees. And then Etactics as well. All right, if you're still here, you're eligible to win a free 90-day trial of Etactics' comprehensive compliance solution, K through compliance. We'll be randomly selecting one of you, and if you win, we'll reach out to you. From there, you have 24 hours to reply to us before we select another winner. So thank you so much for everyone attending today, and have a great day.